So this video is based on strategic drift, which is for AQA Business Studies, the A2 specification in Unit 10. And all strategic drift relates to is when organisations are unable to keep up with the pace and the changes that are happening within their environment, within their market. So because they're unable to keep pace with it, it usually ends with major problems for the firm and possibly even the death of the firm. Now, there's been lots and lots of different examples of strategic drift throughout the years, especially with the innovation and the involvement of technology. Because of technology, it's shown this even more. So what we'll do in this video is we'll come up with a few examples. We'll look at the different phases. We'll look at why it happened and so on. So again, why does it happen? Well, I've already mentioned technology, but it doesn't just have to be technological change. It could be social change. It could be any type of change. But if the business just cannot adapt to those changes, or for whatever reason they're reluctant to adapt to those changes, then that could be a reason for it. Maybe a discovery that what worked before it just doesn't work anymore. That could be to do with consumer behaviour changing. And again, firms, from looking at this and looking at the examples and the research that I've done on this, usually the firm is completely they're completely aware of the changes, but for whatever reason they just seem to be reluctant to do anything about it, and they resist those changes, and that's where usually strategic drift comes in. So complacency maybe sets in, often built on previous success, which management assumes will continue. So a slight air of arrogance, and again that's quite common within a lot of the examples. Or senior management so they're completely in denial that there's even a problem, and even when they're presented with research, they still don't believe the research. And again, you have to argue that it's obviously poor management. So the different forces: you've got phase 1 incremental change, you've got phase 2 strategic drift, you've got phase 3 flux, and then phase 4 is pretty much the do or die. Okay, do you transform or do you just accept failure? Because if you don't transform, you're going to fail. So in terms of the 4 phases, if we look at phase 1, okay, incremental change, all that means is maybe the changes that are happening in the external environment haven't really taken off yet. Maybe there's little signs of it, but it's not really impacting the market quite yet. So again, what the firm might do is just do a couple of changes, which enables the business to continue with its success and continue to remain in touch with the external environment. However, these are short term. Okay, if the changes in the market continue, then these little changes will not work anymore. So phase 2, this is where the strategic drift happens, and this is where these small little factors of the external environment is starting to accelerate. So now things are starting to drift apart. The rate of change in the external environment is accelerating, and small incremental changes is just not enough, okay, to remain in touch. So the business is losing its competitive advantage. So this is where the business they'll really notice that there's definitely changes in the market, and they'll maybe, if they're a bit slow to these, they'll be carrying out the research. You'd hope that they've already carried out the research after phase 1, but that just depends. Phase 3 is the flux, so this phase is characterised by management indecision. There's now a significant gap between what the market expects and what the business is delivering. So management may have recognised this gap and begun to alter strategies, but again, how much are they altering the strategies? How fast are they altering the strategies? And do they actually believe in the strategies? And do they believe that these market changes are here to stay? So if there's management indecision, then that could suggest that, again, not all managers agree on these strategies. Not all managers agree on these changes and the impact it's going to have on the business. So with these disagreements, it makes things harder. It makes strategies harder to implement, and it causes strategic drift. Now, phase 4 is the final phase, and that's transformational change or death. As I've put here, it's the moment of truth. Pretty much do or die, as I said before. So even the management recognise that they have to transform, they have to change to survive within the marketplace, or maybe it's got too far now, and maybe they're unable to change, or maybe, again, for whatever reason, they still believe, at this rate, they still believe that it really shows the poor management within the company. But there's been some prime examples of this with huge brands, absolutely massive brands, which we'll look at soon. Now, one really good example which relates to strategic drift is what happened to BlackBerry. Now, I would definitely recommend to use this link and go on the link and watch the video, because the video is brilliant, not only for BlackBerry but also on Apple, and not the iPhone, just Apple in general as well. So what it says in this video is about Apple being one example of strategic drift, but that came out stronger at the other side. So it says that especially at the time when Jobs was forced out of Apple, they started to lose their vision. They started to lose what the market was all about. They weren't ahead in the market anymore. Competitors were catching up. They were maybe releasing flops that the market didn't need, and they were heading towards that strategic drift. And what they did, okay, I mean, their biggest strategy was to do with getting Jobs back. Okay, because Jobs had the vision, he was the innovative one within the company, and getting him back, and also because of his time out away from the company, he was able to explore a little bit further into market changes, into what the market might want, or creating what the market might want. And therefore, getting Jobs back helped them to get back on track, and especially with the iPod. Now, with BlackBerry obviously. How long ago? Maybe 8 to 10 years ago were very, very successful. They were the market leaders in mobile phone technology, but now Blackberries, they've got no presence in the mobile phone industry. So therefore, they're the prime example. Now, why is that? Well, BlackBerry is quite an interesting case because they had a really specific business model, which is actually based on businesses. So what they'd do is they'd create relationships, and they'd get businesses to be their customers, because businesses would get the phones because they were very good for their employees, and they would distribute it to their employees as their work devices, and that really did work. But what they failed to consider is other mobile phone companies coming into the industry, and how they might aim at different relationships with the customers, and instead of going for businesses, actually going for your everyday usage. And that's what Apple did. They also didn't really invest in R&D for smartphone technology as well, like Apple did. So when Apple released the iPhone, they aimed it at your everyday consumer, the ones who not just use it for work, use it outside of work, but then because they've got it, they'd also use it for work as well. So therefore, they didn't need the BlackBerry. So when BlackBerry were obviously communicating with these companies, and these companies were, well, actually, our employees don't really need the BlackBerry, so we don't really need to make the order. That was obviously impacting BlackBerry. Now, BlackBerry is still around, and you probably argue they're still in that phase 4 though, and they're trying to transform. They are trying, but it's taking some time, and it's going to be very difficult to do so, especially the likes of Samsung and Apple, as I've mentioned before, being in that market. Other examples, I mean, think about Nokia. It's happened to Nokia. It's happened to Sony Ericsson. Sony Ericsson, I'd probably argue a lot of it was complacency. They believed their success would remain. They didn't really properly, again, research and develop. I mean, with strategic drift, a lot of the firms that have not done very well are the ones who have been slow to R&D. Now, remember, the likes of Apple or companies like Dyson that are well renowned for research and development, then they're not looking at products for today. They're looking at products for not even for tomorrow, but for 20 years ahead. So if you're not at researching and developing now, then you're going to always be behind, and that's going to be a massive issue. So BlackBerry might be carrying out R&D now, but again, is it too little, too late? Now, I think this is the best example of strategic drift from what I've seen, and it's to do with Kodak. Again, this comes from a very, very good article in the Forbes magazine about Kodak and what happened to Kodak, and it really, really does relate to strategic drift in the different phases. So I'm just going to go through it now, and I'd recommend that you read the whole article because it's absolutely brilliant for the topic. So there are a few corporate blunders as staggering as Kodak's missed opportunities in digital photography, a technology that it invented. So again, Kodak was the biggest player within this market, but yet now it's failed. So the strategic failure was the direct cause of Kodak's decades-long decline as digital photography destroyed its film-based business model. So they didn't really invest the time and the money within, obviously, digital technology because it was so loyal to its film-based business model. So Kodak's management inability to see digital photography as a disruptive technology, even as its research has extended the boundaries of the technology, would continue for decades. Because of that inability to do so and that failure to transform, it obviously was the death of them. So to understand how Kodak could stay in denial for so long, there's a story, okay, from Vince Barber. He recounts from 1981, when he was Kodak's head of market intelligence, around the time that Sony introduced the first electronic camera, one of Kodak's largest retail photo finishers asked him whether they should be concerned about digital photography. With the support of Kodak's CEO, he conducted very extensive research efforts that looked at the core technologies and the likely adoption curves around this type of technology. And the results of the studies produced both bad and good news. The bad news was that the digital photography had the potential capability to replace Kodak's established film-based business. The good news was that it would take some time for that to occur, and that Kodak had roughly 10 years to prepare for this transition. So we can see this is phase one. This is phase one where they're starting to see it. And now it's all to do with the fact that they're saying good and bad news and saying that they've got 10 years. 10 years is, they need to be planning for that now, well, at the time, which they didn't do. So instead what they did was small little changes to kind of overshadow what could potentially happen. So the study's projections were based on numerous factors, including the cost of digital photography equipment, the quality of images and prints, different components of the cameras, displays, the printers, all pointed to that conclusion that adoption of digital photography would be minimal and non-threatening for a time. Now it was true, but again, just remember what I said about research and development. Just think about these companies that do plan for the future. They're the ones that are most successful. And if you think, oh, okay, I'm market leader at the moment, I've got time, there's 10 years before this really takes off, I don't really need to worry about it now, then before you know it, you're going to be behind in the market and you will experience strategic drift. So the problem is that during this 10 years window of opportunity, they did very little, okay? And you could argue, is that arrogance? Is that complacency? Is that poor leadership? So in fact, Kodak made exactly the mistake that George Eastman, its actual founder, avoided twice. So 2 different times, George Eastman saw that something could happen within the market and adapted, and that's what really made Kodak take off. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't remain the owner, okay, and the people who took over the company for years and years after failed to really live up to his I suppose his strategic understanding. So when he gave up, just a little bit of background of George Eastman to kind of prove how he was able to adapt when he very first founded and started Kodak. So I mean, at first he gave up a profitable dry business plate business to move to film, because obviously he saw potential within it and he saw a market growing, but he also invested in colour film, even though many companies at that time were reluctant to do so because they thought it was inferior to black and white. But obviously he saw change and he adapted very, very quickly. So he avoided the flux. So anyway, if we go back to the example of phase one. So if we have a look at this, even though I got a close look at the fact that rather than prepare for the time when digital photography would replace film, as Eastman had with prior disruptive technologies, Kodak chose to use digital to improve the quality of film. So what they really should have done is realise that film was coming to an end. They don't need to spend any more time on film and just focus solely on digital. This strategy was just a small strategy that kind of helped to maybe like I said before, and like I said when I look at the diagram, just kind of like seal over the cracks. But again, it was only short term. So the strategy continued even though in 1986 Kodak's research labs developed the first megapixel camera, one of the milestones that he had obviously forecasted as a tipping point in terms of viability of standalone digital photography. They were still concentrating on this digital film. So the choice to use digital as a prop for the film business culminated in the 1996 introduction of the Advantix. So actually this wasn't a small decision. Like I mentioned in the diagram, this Kodak actually, and this was another strategy that they did, and they spent more than $500 million to do this, to develop and launch. And again, you could argue it was completely money wasted. So one of the key features of the Advantix system was that it allowed users to preview their shots and indicate how many prints they wanted. The Advantix preview could do that because it was digital camera, yet it still used film and emphasised print because Kodak was in the photo, film, chemical and paper business. Again, why? Why didn't they just drop it? So again, it dropped. Why buy a digital camera and still pay for the film? There's absolutely 0 point. The fact that they spent $500 million on this was an absolute waste of money when they should have spent that $500 million invested in just digital technology. So phase 2, the strategic drift, but also phase 3, flux. For more than another decade, a series of new Kodak CEOs would bemoan his predecessor's failure to transform the organisation to digital, declare his earnest intention to do so, and proceed to fail at the transition as well. So George Fisher, who was led from his position of CEO at Motorola to succeed Whitmore in '93, captured the core issue when he told the New York Times that Kodak regarded digital photography as the enemy, an evil juggernaut that would kill the chemical-based film and paper business that fueled Kodak's sales and profits for decades. But again, why see it as an enemy, but actually see it as the future? See it as that is what the market wants. If you see that as an enemy, then you already that shows that you are reluctant to innovate. You are reluctant to meet customers' growing and future needs. So Fisher oversaw the flop of Advantix and was gone by 1999. So we can see there's quite a lot of management changes that are going on. And again, with different management coming in and going out, it's quite hard to start implementing strategies and start implementing decisions for the future. So that again could have caused management indecision. So Kodak's management not only presided over the creation of technological breakthroughs, but was also presented with an accurate market assessment about the risks and the opportunities of such capabilities. Yet Kodak failed in making the right strategic choices. So now we are on phase 4. What happened to Kodak? So Don Strickland, a former vice president who left the company in 1993, because even then he couldn't persuade it to manufacture and market a digital camera, put it this way: we developed the world's first consumer digital camera, but we could not get approval to launch or sell it because of the fear of the effects on the film market. Now that statement says all. They were so loyal to film, they thought Kodak was film. But what they didn't realise is Kodak is the brand. Kodak will, if they'd researched and developed properly, Kodak would remain. Even if film had gone, Kodak would have remained if they'd actually innovated. But they were so loyal to film and they thought the whole business was just about film that it caused the failure, it caused the death. So in 2009, after 74 years of production, Kodak stopped selling its 35mm colour film. 2011, their shares fell by 80%. Okay, again, they were starting to become insolvent. They were struggling to meet pension costs for its employees, and in 2012, it filed for bankruptcy.